Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us here today at the office of the Opposition Leader of Trinidad and Tobago. My name is Hans Evans, Member of Parliament for Diego Martin West. Today, as always, when we have these press conferences, we address pressing issues affecting our country. Today, joining us, we have the Member of Parliament for Port of Spain North, St. Anne's West, the Honourable Stuart Young SC. We have Senator the Honourable Vishnu Dhanpaul, and we also have Senator the Honourable Melanie Roberts-Radgman joining us today. The way we're going to do the press conference today is we are going to have each individual come forth and present, and at the end we'll have the questions. So please remember to take note of your questions, and we thank you again for joining us today, those of you all here with us presently and those of you all online as well. So we'll begin today by welcoming Senator the Honourable Vishnu Dhanpaul.
Thank you very much, Hans, and good morning, everyone. This morning, I just want to go through a bit again on the budget, and I want to stay on message based on debate in the Parliament, and judging from the standing finance committee's debate in the Parliament, it is obvious that what we've been saying all along is that the budget will be derailed by the first quarter of next year. In fact, I'm going better, the first month of the calendar year, new calendar year. And why would the budget be derailed? I mean, something that I would not like to see. It has happened before. Budgets have been recalibrated after a month, 2 months, okay, and put back out. You have seen many times where ministries have been asked to cut their budget by 10% and come back to the Ministry of Finance across the board 10%. But the budget is essentially based on some very dubious assumptions and some exceedingly creative accounting. And I'm just going to show you one, and I'm not going to go into the numbers because I want to pitch this again for the ordinary man in the street. And I'm not going to go into the oil prices. You're all aware of the oil prices and the gas prices significantly budgeted higher than projected for next year. But I just want to say this, and to put it in perspective. This country spends $4.5 billion a month on goods and services, transfers, etc., that you can't afford not to spend $4.5 billion. You do a quick mathematics, and that equates to $54 billion a year. You cannot afford not to spend that $54 billion. And I keep saying, I'm staying on message. That's like transfers and subsidies, old age pensions, public assistance grant, etc., debt service, all the direct charges on the exchequer. You can't afford not to spend on that. So we are locked in at $54 billion a year. The budget has projected revenue $55 billion. You understand what's the problem there? And with a $20 difference in the projected price of oil and the international projected price of oil, a $20 difference, US dollar difference. So you understand you don't have a lot of margin for error. So what is going to happen starting from this month, which is what we call, November is what we call a dry month at the Ministry of Finance. Starting from this month, the government is going to be cash trapped. The cash flow, they're going to have a cash flow problem starting from November. Okay? And you're going to see it. And there's a reason why public servants won't be paid on time, etc., etc. Cash flow issues, and it's going to just continue into the new fiscal year. So, one of the reasons why most people would suspect that the government inflated the oil price assumption, and although we're not really an oil province any longer, Stuart Young MP will tell you that we're more a gas province. But however, the price of oil still has a tremendous impact on total revenue. One of the basic assumptions is that the government wants access to the Heritage and Civilization Fund. And to do that, obviously, you inflate the projected price of oil as against what you expect to get from actual. And that triggers the withdrawal rules of the Heritage and Stabilization Fund. Similarly, on the expenditure assumptions, as I said earlier, mandatory expenditure is 54 billion. But surprisingly, given all the discussions during the campaign, etc., and during the budget debate about having new revenue sources, etc., remember what the question? Where are you going to get the money from? And they mentioned, the government mentioned, well, we're going to get new revenue sources. However, when you have a PSIP of only $4.1 billion, a little above 4% of your GDP, there's not much you can do, because your public sector investment program is where you generate your economic growth, you generate your investment activity. This is where you expect your economic growth to take place. But your 4.1 billion cannot generate the additional revenue in the non-energy sector that the government is projecting. And I want to say a bit on the deficit, which is one of the most deceptive deficits I've ever seen in all my career at the Ministry of Finance. Not many years, just about 30-something. At 3.8 billion, or 2.17% of GDP. But it is more obvious not for what it includes, but what it doesn't include. And here what it does not include, that deficit. It doesn't include back pay of 10% for public servants. Does not include. It does not include the addition to recurrent expenditure when you pay the additional 10%. You see, that 4.5 billion I said that must be paid every month, it goes up by 200 million automatically from the time you make that 10% salary increase. Let me make it clear. As a former public servant, in fact, I probably still am a public servant, I want to make it clear that I have no problems with the public servants getting an increase in salary. But things must be put in place. It's not at the expense of the rest of the country, at the expense of the economy. I'm all for public servants getting an increase. In fact, last time when they got the 14%, I negotiated the 14%. So it's not a matter of I am against public servants. I also used to be a member of the PSC. Right? So I cannot be accused of that. So firstly, as I said, doesn't include the back pay. It doesn't include the current expenditure for the salary increase. And for some inexplicable reason, I want you all to go and check. I said it during my debate. On page 110 of the draft estimates of Head 19, you'll see a figure there, 7.675 billion. Last year, it was 12. That's debt servicing. And the previous year, it was 12. How could it fall so drastically by $5 billion in the face of an increasing debt stock? If your debt stock is increasing, your debt servicing must increase. And then, this is a figure that a lot of ministers of finance like to forget. And again, I'm giving the page on page 5, or the estimates of revenue. Okay? There's a figure there for VAT of $8.2 billion. That figure for VAT is not a net figure. It doesn't include arrears of $7.9 billion. Okay, so all of that is part of the deficit. And you know what it does not include also? That deficit does not include the employer's contribution to NIS. Not that additional that is going to come in into 2026, the 45% at the end of 2027, or at the beginning of 2027, I should say. And a bit on the financing. I want to direct you to page 67 of the estimates of revenue. I'm sure you'll be familiar with the estimates of revenue, what we call the yellow book, right? And the first thing is, why would we have a deficit? Why would the minister be projected a deficit of $3.8 billion and a financing of almost $19 billion? Go with page 67, you see there, black and white. Domestic financing, $8.1 billion. External financing, $10.8. Why are you projecting $19 billion in financing for a deficit of $3.8 billion? That's the question. Is that creative accounting? or is the true deficit really 19 billion? But you see, while that may be hidden nicely in the estimates, you can't hide from Standard and Poor's. You cannot hide from Moody's. Those guys calculated that already. Okay, they understand the books. You can't hide it from the Article 4 consultation of the IMF. You can't. And this is where the budget will be derailed. And as I said, I've seen a budget derail in the first quarter of the fiscal year. I've seen it being derailed in the second quarter of the fiscal year. And everything had to be recalibrated. So how they plan on how does government plan on financing this deficit? Well, they'll have to come back to Parliament because we are approaching the limit, our borrowing limit, and they lost all the headroom that they had between how much they could borrow and the limit of the legislated limit. So you can expect the government to come back to Parliament by about December for the latest, to ask for additional spending limit. And what is going to happen? From the time that amendment is introduced to increase the borrowing limit, downgrade. All right? Immediate downgrade from Standard and Poor's and Moody's. And the next thing that, for some inexplicable reason, I keep mentioning it all the time, but I don't know if the minister is worried about it. I don't know if the governing central bank is worried about it. I am certainly worried about it. I've been worried about it for a long time because it's given me a lot of sleepless nights at the Ministry of Finance. Are you aware that we have an exchequer account that is in deficit of by $50 billion? In other words, the minister cannot do anything with fiscal policy until that $50 billion is paid down. He cannot do anything with a lot of the accounts in that cash balances at the central bank have been mortgaged to this thing called the overdraft facility at the central bank. And it has built up over the years since 2009. Every time you run a fiscal deficit, that number builds up. The only way you could pay it down or pay it back is that you have to run fiscal surpluses to pay back into the central bank. For some strange reason, I'm not getting any feedback on that. That's $50 billion. That is stifling fiscal policy. Can't do a thing about it. I'm not seeing it in the press. I'm not hearing about it in Parliament. I'm not hearing about it from the minister. I'm not hearing about it from the Honourable Prime Minister. So I don't know and you know what? You're not going to wake up one day and that $50 billion is just going to disappear. So I just want to look quickly now at just some of the, and they've been well ventilated in public, some of the fiscal measures, and try and put a stop to some of the confusion that's going on. A levy on the assets of commercial banks. Come on, folks. Commercial banks are already faced with a 35% corporation tax and a 6% insurance premium tax for the insurance companies. Obviously, that's going to be passed on to the consumer. I heard the minister saying something about, well, you know, change banks. If it's been passed on, if the fees have been passed on, you change banks. And interfere in banks, especially Republic and First Citizens. But the minister would not like to see a run on a bank. You don't want to see a run on a bank as a Minister of Finance. Second thing, the landlord business surcharge. Obviously, that's going to be passed on to tenants. That's a no-brainer. And the minister's response, move. Get rent somewhere else. It's going to be passed on to all tenants. The electricity surcharge. You know what's critical about this one? One of the main competitive advantages that we had in the Caribbean is on for our manufacturing sector is that we had the input cost of electricity was so low that gave us such a large competitive advantage. And it's very possible that this electricity surcharge will eat into that competitive advantage. And will also be passed on to the consumer. Just quickly on a few others. And this one is the one that my pet peeve, the NIF3, the National Investment Fund. When the National Investment Fund first came out, you remember the Honourable Prime Minister saying that it was a Ponzi scheme? All of a sudden, it's on the street in this government's budget. Where did that come from? Where does Ponzi scheme come from? And the second thing is the agricultural incentives. Those agricultural incentives in the budget were already there. The agricultural sector is the most incentivized sector in Trinidad and Tobago. Go and check for yourself. The importation of foreign used cars, another pet peeve of mine. And you're importing older vehicles into the country. And just the previous week before the budget, the minister is complaining about how he had to drive from Hyderabad or something like that. And it was affecting productivity in the country with your level of traffic. But now you're importing older vehicles into the country. This country brings on about 30,000 vehicles every year onto the road network. But there's no net impact because vehicles are not coming off the network. And as I said in Parliament, I'm going to give people a suggestion to become very rich very quickly. Start a car crushing industry. So you can get cars off the street. We don't have that. There's no net impact. 30,000 vehicles a year. So just quickly, as I conclude, the budget has been silent on a few things. Nowhere to be found. First one, the net international reserves. Do you realize that since April of this year to August, and I'm going to quote the source, the data pack, page 20, the central bank's data pack on page 20, you're going to see end of April, we had 6.2 months of import cover at 5.2 billion US. At the end of August, we had 4.6 months, we had 4.6 billion reserves at 5.4 months of import cover. Where did that 675 million disappear in 5 months? Nothing, we heard nothing about that in the budget. They made a big hullabaloo about the 7% online tax. We're going to remove it. The 7% online tax still exists. The debt to GDP ratio, after this budget, the debt to GDP ratio is going to move from its current 83% to well into the 90s. Guaranteed. Well into the 90s. Now, I firmly believe it's not necessarily the size of the debt of our country. Huh? There are many industrialized first world countries that debt to GDP ratios are over 100%. It's just that it's the trajectory of the debt and your ability to repay. Do we have that ability to repay? Are we satisfied with the trajectory of the debt? That's for the population to answer. And finally, and again, quoting from the minister's document, the review of the economy, Appendix 5, page 193, you will see a contraction in the economy is projected for the end of 2025. A contraction, first time in 3 years. And one final thing, what about the lowering of the corporation tax promised during the campaign? What happened to that? I heard nothing about the lowering of the corporation tax. So just in conclusion, we are projecting here that the budget going to be recalibrated within the new calendar year due to very, very dubious assumptions. I now pass you back to Hans.
Thank you very much, Senator Dhanpaul, for that very comprehensive look into the faults and flaws of the fiscal package for 2025-2026. Up next, we welcome Senator the Honourable Melanie Roberts-Radgman to address some other issues that are in the public sphere presently.
Good morning to the members of the media and to those who are tuned in via the various platforms. Now, I want to take a look at a few issues pertinent to Tobago, to the island, to the THA, to the people of Tobago, and touch very briefly on the Prime Minister's visit this Tuesday to Tobago. Now, I was invited to sit in the Assembly And it was indeed a privilege as a Tobagonian, as the Tobagonian senator, to be present in the Assembly legislature. And as a Tobagonian, of course, I want the absolute best for my island and for my people and for the institutions that govern our development and our operations on the island. Now, never would I have imagined, and for most Tobagonians, never would we have imagined that the Prime Minister, on her first official visit to the island, would have squandered the opportunity that she was given to speak to the people of Tobago and use that opportunity on political rhetoric and on campaigning. And you see, what is concerning is that this is the type of divisiveness and disregard that we have seen driving the government's agenda, its policies, and its actions since they have taken office. We've seen where they've cancelled our Independence Day parade, labeling it as a PNM affair. We've seen where workers across the various sectors have been dismissed unfairly based on mere perceptions of being affiliated with the PNM. Now, indeed, partisanship is essential to any healthy and functioning democracy, but we must ask ourselves what happens when partisanship is weaponized in a way that actually erodes our democracy. And that is what we saw happening on Tuesday in the Assembly legislature. We saw democracy and what little autonomy we currently have as a THA being eroded in more ways than one. Because beyond the misuse and abuse of the Assembly legislature to host what seems like it was a political meeting, we had a Prime Minister who stood there and said to the people of Tobago that pretty much the government doesn't intend to grant us autonomy. Instead, she spoke of this fair share model, this fair share project-based allocation model. And she declined to go into details. I don't know where this was ventilated. I don't know what the realities of this. I don't even know if it's something possible. It seems like all the years of effort, all the advocacy, all the input from brilliant, talented Tobagonians and Trinidadians alike into bringing Tobago further towards autonomy. All these efforts have been discarded and disregarded. And instead, now we're being offered some sort of subjective and seemingly impulsive, shady sort of arrangement that pretty much hinges on the good graces of whoever is in government, in central government at any given time. And I caution the nation, I caution especially my people in Tobago that this is a very subtle but deadly way of really forcing Tobago and Tobagonians to toe a particular line if we want to be treated with respect by the central government. It seems as if the UNC have their way, Tobago will be stripped of even the little protections that we currently have by means of the DRC's 2000 recommendation. Now, it's equally important to listen to what is not being said as it is to what has been said. And the Prime Minister said, no legislation is needed to give Tobago more money. And that is untrue. In fact, the DRC recommendation provides a range, an upper limit and a lower limit. To change those limits, you need legislation in place. And that's exactly what the Tobago Island Government Bill and the associated constitutional amendment bill was providing. That's what it was meant to do. It was moving our lower limit to 6.8% of the national allocation, and it gave the central government some flexibility and discretion to push our upper limits to give us an increased allocation. More importantly, what we need in Tobago is legislation that protects us from any administration that would want to deal with us, that would want to govern with dishonesty and with contempt. And one must ask the question, is it that the UNC does not want these expanded powers for Tobago legislated because once it's enshrined in the law, it becomes a legal right rather than a privilege that any government or any central government can just take away or dangle over the head of the THA or use to manipulate us? And the sad thing is that the UNC has mastered the art of the Trojan horse. They use flowery language. They like to use nice words and soft speech. And they pretend to come bearing gifts, when in reality what they are doing is imposing control mechanisms over the THA and over Tobagonians and how we develop our island. If the UNC-led central government was really about fairness and unity and equality, those are the words that she used when she spoke in the Assembly legislature on Tuesday. If she was really about these tenets, then I strongly believe that one of the very first matters that we would have seen on the legislative agenda would have been the matter of autonomy for Tobago. We've had all sorts of bills come through the parliament. We've had bills come through that allow persons with very little connection to Tobago or Trinidad to be able to claim citizenship almost in perpetuity. Yet, legislation that will guarantee us greater autonomy in Tobago to handle our affairs, to legislate on our own behalf, to take care of the little nuances that we have there but that might not always come to the attention of the central government, to ensure that we got an increased allocation. We've seen where there's no mention of any such legislation being brought to the parliament. And for me, for many of us in Tobago, that's quite concerning. It's highly, highly disappointing. I know as a fact that many Tobagonians across the political divide expected that on Tuesday, we would have heard something about autonomy for Tobago. It's disappointing and it's disrespectful to know that nothing about that was mentioned. And while we're on the topic about fairness to Tobago, because during the political campaign that happened, the campaign meeting that happened at the Assembly legislature, some very unfair, unfounded, and false accusations were made that the People's National Movement, especially when they're in central government, do not care about the people of Tobago. I am a Tobagonian. I was born in Tobago. I was raised in Tobago. And I will die in Tobago. And I can stand here very proudly and say to this room and to the people of Trinidad and Tobago that the People's National Movement has always collaborated with the THA, with the people of Tobago, and has always ensured that they demonstrate a firm commitment to the people of Tobago in the way that they operate. And the proof of the pudding is in the eating. So I'll give a few examples. Let me start from Tobago East and then come all the way down to Tobago West. In the East, under a PNM-led central government, we would have seen, what should I call it? An era of development, maybe that's what I can call it, of excitement and of development. We saw brand new Roxborough Hospital, state of the art. It's an excellent hospital. It's a beauty to behold. We have persons coming from even Tobago West to get services in the Roxborough Hospital. We have persons coming from Trinidad to receive services, attend clinic at the Roxborough Hospital because of the quality of the service, because of the efficiency of the service that they get at the Roxborough Hospital. The staff there, they're well trained, they're courteous, and Tobagonians are all, we're proud, we're very happy of our Roxborough Hospital delivered by the People's National Movement. We have the Roxborough Fire Station, services Tobago East and the North Side, where I'm from in Tobago. We have the Roxborough Police Station as well, also redeveloped by the People's National Movement. Now, we have the Speyside Secondary School, we have the Mason Hall High School, we have the Goodwood High School as well, all delivered by the People's National Movement. Now, let me move down to the west. We have the Shervan Police Station down on Shervan Road, again, state-of-the-art, well-functioning, well-staffed police station. We have the Cove Estate, which houses the Cove Industrial Hub, and that allows for economic diversification. That's where our manufacturing sectors, where it operates. Down there, we also have the dual-powered electricity generation plant at Cove. Now, for us in Tobago, at one time, we used to have electricity issues. That's something that we know. That was our reality functioning in Tobago. that is something of the past. We have a very steady supply of electricity in Tobago. We have a very reliable supply of electricity in Tobago. As a matter of fact, when electricity goes now, people are shocked. They're like, wait, what's happening? Because it's such a rare occurrence to see electricity going down in Tobago. We have the landing of a $1 billion natural gas pipeline and natural gas processing facilities that was done in collaboration with the NGC, also in the West, Tobago West. All right, we have the Scarborough Hospital functioning, some mismanagement under the current administration in TPP, but nonetheless, we have the hospital there, and soon enough that will be fixed. We have our fast ferries. Now, for us in Tobago, inter-island connectivity is a major, no longer an issue, but it's something that is always a concern for us. We need to be able to come to Trinidad to access services. We need to be able to come to Trinidad to do business. And then, of course, there's the domestic tourism that we get on account of Trinidadians coming to Tobago. Under the People's National Movement, we have these beautiful, luxurious, convenient ferries where we see on a weekend Trinidadians after work, they drive their cars onto the boat and they come to Tobago and they enjoy our beaches or restaurants or bars or flora or fauna. And then on a Sunday, again, they return via the ferry to Tobago, to Trinidad. Just a few weeks ago, we had Tobago Carnival and it was the same thing. The Port Authority added additional sailings, and in no time, as soon as those sailings were added, they were sold out. And we had a large numbers of Trinidadians coming up to the island, contributing to our economic development, of course, up there, participating in our culture, adding to what we do in Tobago, enjoying our tourist and tourism product, all on account of the convenience, the efficiency of the fast ferries, again, delivered by the People's National Movement to the people of Tobago. And then let me come all the way down to Crown Point, and this one is really the crown jewel. The brand new ANR International Airport. It is a sight to behold, and for those of you listening and for members of the media who haven't been to Tobago to see it, I encourage you to go have a look. It really is something to see, and we in Tobago, regardless of political affiliation, we are proud of it. We are hopeful, and actually we're quite excited to have it open. We've been crying and begging and asking the central government when they're going to operationalize it. I'm not sure of the political nitpicking and football that's going on with that, but we're hoping that very soon it will be up and running. So these are just a few of the major developments, and there are many, many to name. We could sit here for maybe weeks if we were supposed to really list out, but I just wanted to name a few of the major commitments, collaborations that we have seen happening between a PNM-led central government and the Tobago House of Assembly. And these collaborations happen regardless of who was in power in the THA, might I add. It was done for the people of Tobago in our best interest to ensure that our island functioned in an efficient and effective manner. Now, there's one other issue that we're grappling with at the moment, and that is water security. It's something that we have happening on the island right now, especially persons in Southwest Tobago, or hoteliers, or guest house owners, restaurants, they're all complaining. And I just want to touch on even some of the strides that would have been made by the People's National Movement before leaving office earlier on this year. Now, over $200 million would have been spent on a variety of small, medium, and large projects that undoubtedly did improve the supply of water across the island. The Hillsborough Dam up in the east, that was desilted. The construction of the new Goldsboro water treatment plant, it was started, it was a work in progress when we left. The construction of multiple booster stations around the island. And then pipeline works. I remember this was a major and very exciting project in Tobago. I think this was done in last year, 2024, because it was the buzz. Everyone was talking about it. This major pipeline project that took place to boost water supply in Crown Point and these surrounding areas, so your southwest areas. And then, of course, there were plans that were in place to construct a water treatment plant in Charlottesville. Now, during the Prime Minister's visit on Tuesday, she announced intentions to construct maybe 3, it was very kind of unclear, but about 3 desalination plants in Tobago. But she failed to go into any details, so we have not seen any sort of sustainable or comprehensive plan for this. As far as I'm aware, WASA does not and has never owned any desalination water treatment plant. WASA does not at this point in time have the internal skill sets to manage any such plant. So the people of Tobago, what we're asking is that the Prime Minister and the Minister, I should say, address us and let us know exactly what the plan is here with regards to these proposed desalination plans. Is it that Tobago is going to become caught up in some debt spiral where the government, similar to what exists in Trinidad right now, where the state uses these take or pay contracts and purchases water that can't even be funded properly by the private operators that are operating in Trinidad right now? Is that the same model that's going to be brought to Tobago? Is it that you're going to be increasing water rates in order to pay for this? We just need some details. What is happening here? Now, I would say this also. If the government really cares about our development, and this is one of our major issues, and it really shouldn't be used to play political football, it should be something that is addressed and addressed very quickly. I would propose that the UNC-led central government continue with the plans that were already in place. They are sound plans, they are sustainable plans, and they are plans that can bear fruit. I would urge them, I would encourage them to continue to execute these plans in a sustainable manner without burdening taxpayers any further, without going into any sort of further debt, and without mortgaging the future of our children. Now, in closing, let me reiterate this. Tobago has always been a priority for the People's National Movement. The evidence is there. Just come around Tobago, look around, and you will see it. The PNM's commitment to the people of Tobago goes beyond the silly song bites and the low jabs and, you know, the nice, empty, flowery talk. We have delivered well. We have delivered consistently, and we have delivered sustainably. And actually, we have delivered responsibly. And whether in government or in opposition, rest assured that we, the People's National Movement, will continue to safeguard the well-being of the people of Tobago, of my people. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Senator Roberts-Radgman. Once again, just a reminder, we ask you all to hold your questions till after the final speaker is finished. We'll have a mic passed around, and just so we can ensure that members of the viewing public can actually hear your questions, we ask that each of our guests here today, or reporters, ask the question on mic. Up next, we welcome the Member of Parliament for Port of Spain North, St. Anne's West. Please welcome Stuart Young, SC.
Thank you, Hans, to my colleagues, members of the media, wider viewing and listening public of Trinidad and Tobago. My task here this morning is quite an unfortunate one. We have come to address the political gimmickry, to use that phrase of the Prime Minister, and the sham that both herself and the Chief Secretary are attempting to pull on the people of Tobago and also us here in Trinidad. And it is the recent theatrics that took place, unfortunately, in the Tobago House of Assembly this week with the handing over of an alleged export license for aggregate product from the Studley Park quarry. The first thing I'd like to discuss with Trinidad and Tobago is the importance of aggregate and how aggregate is necessary for our road rehabilitation, the road construction, also the production of concrete in Trinidad and Tobago. We, over the past few years, have been attempting to do a lot of road rehabilitation. We all know it. We all experience the potholes daily throughout Trinidad and also Tobago. In fact, right now in Tobago, along the major highway, the Claude Noel Highway, there are areas that require immediate emergency work and rehabilitation. The aggregate product that is produced from Studley Park is world class, and in particular, the armor rock that is produced from Studley Park. So really, it is to inform the people of Trinidad and Tobago, and more particularly Tobago, don't be fooled by any export license. The former PNM central government worked very hard with the THA to always ensure it was allowed to produce aggregate at the Studley Park quarry, and that is because that aggregate is needed. In fact, unfortunately, again, in the continuation of misinformation, we had Secretary Trevor James come out, I saw it in the newspapers today, and say a number of things. So let me start there. First of all, there would have been no order by the Ministry of Works to the Studley Park quarry over the last 2 years, because the Ministry of Works does not procure aggregate on behalf of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. That is handled by NIDCO. So you would see, and let him deny it, that there were orders being placed by NIDCO for the works. Then to say it was only used for the Diego Martin interchange, again, everybody knows that there was the construction of the Point Fortin to San Fernando Highway, and in particular, Mosquito Creek, where the best aggregate product and necessary aggregate product for that project would have come or should have come from Studley Park. Also, you had highways being built in the Grandie area. Then you would recall in the last 2 years, the coastal erosion that would have taken place in the Manzanilla-Mayaro area, where the road was literally washed away. Again, the aggregate product to repair those roads, to build those roads, the best product would have come from Tobago and Studley Park. The procurement would have been done by NIDCO and also contractors who awarded the contracts to do these road works. People, the main issue with export of aggregate from Studley Park is there is such huge local demand for this particular aggregate domestically in both Tobago and Trinidad that is not being satisfied, no matter how much you ask Studley Park quarry to produce it. It is a demand issue, and the demand that is the local domestic demand for repairing our own roads, both in Tobago and Trinidad, cannot be met by the Studley Park quarry. Forex, which is a big issue affecting all of us in Trinidad and Tobago. Unashamedly, you had the Minister of Finance tell the truth and say he himself as Minister of Finance could only get $200 when he went to the bank. Every single one of us, average and normal Trinidadians and Tobagonians, are being affected by a lack of Forex. The decision that we took as the central government, the PNM, was we are not going to spend hard-earned, scarce foreign reserves, Forex, US dollars, to import aggregate if it can be provided right here in Tobago. In fact, in Trinidad, the former Prime Minister, myself as Minister of Energy, Minister Sinanan as Minister of Works and Transport, we went up to the Blanchisseur's quarry, national quarry. We did all that we could to try and produce this necessary aggregate here in Trinidad, because if you have to import it, you're using the foreign exchange that could use better else in other areas. And this was the problem. So we said, listen, produce and supply for all of the domestic needs of Trinidad and Tobago, and then you can export. But that cannot even be done. In fact, one of the documents I'll leave with you today was in 2024, September 2024, NIDCO went out with a request for proposal for the supply and delivery of aggregates to try and get aggregate. And we even looked at importing aggregate. The Cabinet of Trinidad and Tobago actually provided permission for importation of aggregate because the domestic supply had become so desperately short and so many issues with it that we could not get our road rehabilitation done. And you know what happened? So Cabinet approved, let us allow the importation of aggregate. They were looking at importing aggregate of the nature and type that is done by Studley Park, Tobago, all the way from Nova Scotia in Canada and also from St. Lucia. The former Prime Minister Rowley, and myself received calls, numerous requests from President Irfan Ali in Guyana, who have a serious infrastructure program going on, asking if we could export aggregate to Trinidad. And the response was, as soon as we've satisfied our own demand. So Cabinet took a decision because we needed the aggregate, it was not being produced by Studley Park and the other quarries in Trinidad. In fact, the national quarries up in Blanchisseuse that could also produce the types of aggregate needed. Unfortunately, when they went in, the geologist said it was unsafe and they had to stop the work being done there. So we went out. Let us allow the importation. We told contractors, go ahead, you bring in the aggregate. You go and source it and bring it in, which of course will arrive here at a higher cost more to maintain and to fix our roads and to build our roads in both Tobago and Trinidad. You know what happened next? NIDCO then comes back to Cabinet and says the contractors are asking for the government to provide the foreign exchange to buy aggregate. Again, when we are in a time where every citizen is complaining about a shortage of foreign exchange, why would we use and prioritize the use of our limited US dollars and foreign exchange to import aggregate when it can be produced right here in Tobago at Studley Park and hopefully in other areas in Trinidad? So that is the policy behind it. So don't be fooled now that, oh, you have an export license. So what is going to happen now? And I'm asking the Prime Minister, the Minister of Works and Transport, and all of those responsible. So the limited amount being produced in Tobago at Studley Park is now going to be exported. Where is the aggregate that we need going to come from? Where is the domestic demand? Where is the supply going to come from that? And don't keep misleading the people. Why would the Secretary for Infrastructure, Mr. Trevor James, say that no roads are being repaired and no, that Ministry of Works doesn't place orders for aggregate? So say, well, there's no order placed by Ministry of Works for the last 2 years. Because all the orders were being placed by the contractors awarded the contracts, as well as by NIDCO. These are the issues we're facing. You know, one of the things Senator Dhanpaul and myself and other members have discussed, and I drew it to the country's attention. In 5 months, this UNC government has withdrawn $1 billion US dollars. $1 billion US dollars from the Heritage and Stabilization Fund. In 5 months of being in office, they've taken out $400 million US dollars. From our reserve accounts at the central bank, they have taken out $600 million. I was asking two of the leading banks in Trinidad and Tobago last week, did they get an increase in the supply of US dollars in the last 5 months? The unequivocal answer was no. So where has that US $1 billion gone that has now dropped our foreign reserves and our import cover, to almost 5 months? And when we go below that, we will end up at the IMF according to the formulas. And you now want to go and put us in the burden and the dangerous position of having to try and import aggregate that can be produced, the best aggregate, best armor rock in this whole region. Some of it could be produced in Studley Park. That is where you're going to put us, just so you could hold up a piece of paper and again try to fool, unfortunately, the people of Tobago and Trinidad. So it was my duty here this morning as the former Minister of Energy and someone who did a lot of work to try. And I'll tell you, the experience with trying to get the blasting license for Studley Park, even the quarrying license, when the Ministry of Energy technocrats and public servants said, well, they couldn't get a renewal at Studley Park of their quarrying license because there were disputes over audits, etc. We, the central government, under my instructions, asked the public servants to just allow the Studley Park quarry to operate so we could get the aggregate, to allow them a license for periods, so they will always allow that. So the whole export conversation comes down to there is more than enough demand here in Trinidad and Tobago for the product that can be quarried at Studley Park, but more importantly, it was not being fulfilled. And when you have to import this aggregate because our roads require the work and the construction of the roads require this type of aggregate, it is going to cost us foreign exchange, forex, US dollars, that quite simply the priority should not rest on importing aggregate when we could have it produced here? So my questions, as I've laid out there, are where is the aggregate going to come from? Or is it that you're going to abandon the roads of Trinidad and Tobago? Or is it that you have contracts that you want to line up with specific people for the importation of this aggregate? And the question then becomes, where is the foreign exchange going to come from? Because we are seeing at the same time, literally, and this is not alarmist, this is not fear-mongering, you are literally seeing the collapse of the energy industry taking place in front of us, which is where our foreign exchange earnings come from. So people of Trinidad and Tobago, those are the facts. Those are the facts, unfortunately, all behind this simple export license. By all means, we want Studley Park Quarry to be successful. We want the people of Tobago to reach a position because there's a ready sale for it domestically. But if you're going to earn $10 exporting it, $10 by your exports of the aggregate from Studley Park, but then the need for Trinidad and Tobago is going to cost us $100. How does that make sense? Isn't it better that we supply our own needs, save our foreign exchange, allow the money, the inflows of money to Studley Park? And the last thing I'll say is, it is a fact that the last PNM central government did everything it could to assist Studley Park, whether it be for blasting licenses, whether it be for their quarry license. The sticking point may have been an export license, but only on the basis that I've just outlined to you, that there is more demand here in Trinidad and Tobago that could not be satisfied. You didn't want to use your foreign exchange to import something that you could produce right here. And there's an embarrassing story that when the former Prime Minister and Minister of Works, Prime Minister Rowley and Minister Sinanan, were going to visit Studley Park to see how they could help to increase production. Unfortunately, instructions came from above at the THA not to allow the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, the Minister of Works for Trinidad and Tobago, access to the Studley Park Quarry. So the plea is, please do what is best for the island of Tobago and the island of Trinidad and the nation of Trinidad and Tobago. Stop trying to fool the people. Stop. Where has $1 billion gone? That is a question, is as unanswered, as is the question, no matter how many times it's asked, how many times I ask it, did NGC win the arbitration against SIS for the Beetham wastewater plant? What is the award? What are you doing about radio silence? I expect radio silence here. I expect some sort of political continued gimmickry and noise to be made. But people of Trinidad and Tobago, let it not be said that we did not come to you with the facts that are undisputable, as well as the dangers that lie ahead, especially with our foreign exchange. If our import cover falls any lower, the formulas, the international financial formulas dictate out of our control that we are going to end up in an IMF program. Is it that we're going to use our hard-earned, increasingly scarce US foreign exchange to import rocks to Trinidad and Tobago when we can produce these same rocks and aggregate right here in Trinidad and Tobago? So that is what I wanted to come and provide you with the facts, for you now to be armed with the truth and the facts, and for you to make your decisions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, the Honourable Stuart Young, SC, Member of Parliament. Ladies and gentlemen, members of the media, we'll now have your questions. Just raise your hand and indicate, and I'll have the microphone sent to you and you can ask your question. We start with Ria Tate, Express.
Do you think that...
Please identify which one of the members.
You identified me. Okay.
Which one of the three members you want to like to ask the question?
Okay. I guess both of you can answer and provide an answer because you dealt with Tobago.
Ask the question.
Yes.
I know that you have put out some constraints that the last government had with respect to some of the issues, like the aggregate at Studley Park and so on. But the Prime Minister had other things, like she has a localized police force. She talked about there's another thing at a project she said the PNM stopped that was being funded by the IDB. So that there is a perception that the PNM was unable to do things in 9 years that the government, is able to do in 5. And
5 months.
what do you feel? How do you feel about that? And do you think it also will affect the parties, have a political impact on the party in the THA election?
Thank you very much for those questions, Ria. I'll start with the police force. The police force is something that we were looking at. I can speak to it as former Minister of National Security, but also as a member of the National Security Council and former Prime Minister. It is something we looked at. We had actually asked, so they will find, and I'm sure this is nothing that they have said is new, and you've accepted that in your build-up, that the PNM couldn't do this, etc. But that's simply not true. We had requested the Attorney General to provide an advice. In fact, we had said, let us find a way, the same way you have the municipal police for corporations, for the Tobago, the island of Tobago, so they may have almost autonomous police service. Of course, things in Tobago are different. It's not a municipal corporation. We wanted to make sure it was getting it right. So I wait to see what it is that the Prime Minister and her people produce coming out of that. That is nothing new. It is something that we had committed to doing. I believe former Prime Minister Rowley had committed to doing that. With respect to the other areas, what was the other one that you said?
Is it the something park? Pardon me? Yeah.
Right. So the IDB loan, again, yes, the PNM had been working with the IDB. If you know the process for IDB loans, it takes some time. You have to go through a process. There have to be all sorts of feasibilities, etc. And that money may have been identified at the time the money was identified, I believe, for the building of infrastructure for housing project. But again, it comes down to prioritization and what is done. So that is of no moment. And again, it is unfortunately the current government trying to portray, and as you used the word at the beginning, the perception. They're trying to change the perception that nothing was being done. My senatorial colleague, my senatorial colleague from Tobago listed a whole series of infrastructural projects that influence day-to-day life that was done by the last administration. And one thing I'd like to say is we are committed to getting things done as a PNM. It is about implementation. It is not about old talk. So to identify money that was sitting in account from the IDB for a specific project and say, oh, we're going to do it now. The PNM wasn't suppressing that. There are a number of prioritized needs, etc. And it is how do you prioritize that? The same thing with the police force. That is something that was already being done.
Do you think it will still have an impact? And
everything has an impact, as you know, on domestic politics. But the point is that the PNM can demonstrate, and in particular the politicians, the PNM politicians in Tobago can demonstrate. I mean, one that came to mind as I was sitting listening to the senator talk about the sandals, for example. So the PNM brought sandals to Tobago, attempted to get the sandal project off of the ground initially. For one reason or the other, it did not happen because of the noise. The Stuarts picked it up and left. They went where? Ask Ralph Gonzalez, who's now going into an election on the 27th of this month. Open the sandals in St. Vincent and Grenadines that is oversubscribed. That could have been Tobago. And now going to do a beaches. We had negotiated for sandals, beaches, and a Greg Norman golf course. One of the things that I did as Prime Minister is brought them back to Tobago, sat down with all of the stakeholders. You see what is being done. It's not about, as you put it, flowery language and words like that. So we wait to see. Everything will impact the politics, but the PNM delivers, as you can see with what has been done.
Right, but what about the imagery of the Prime Minister visiting the schools and the children hugging her? We've never seen that kind of
Well, that is not
image.
quite. That is not quite true. I mean, one thing that they seem to do good is, as you say, the imagery. What about the imagery last week, Friday, when the whole country was in a heightened state of alert? All of us were not stupid people. All of us were concerned. I was concerned because I had to go to Parliament to debate an extension of a state of emergency. We are seeing international media. You turn on to any international media house, your colleagues away. Trinidad and Tobago was highlighted as part of the story between the geopolitical crisis between Venezuela and the United States. We have never experienced in our lifetime a war, especially with the type of equipment that is available now. That is real. What did we get from the, what was the word that you use? The imagery. We got a chairman of the National Security Council alighting from vehicle. I don't know nothing about that, holding up a phone. I ain't get no message about that. You felt any better?
Yeah, but
Also, the Minister of Defense and all these types of things. So I am not interested in imagery. It is reality. Up to now, we haven't been addressed on it. And then debacle on Monday morning of the Minister of Defense coming and say, well, I have to brief the Prime Minister as the Chairman of National Security Monday morning after Friday and the whole weekend about why the Defense Force was called back to base and why the police service cancelled or leave. Well, we've now had the Commissioner of Police take responsibility for that, but we still haven't been provided with any answers. So my advice, respectfully, to the population, Ria, is people stop being fooled by imagery. Look at the reality. How is your life affected when you had a panic buying taking place at every grocery? I was getting messages from people in Point Fortin about what was going on down there because they are worried, in particular on the southwestern coast.
Minister Young, Jen Sullivan, Guardian Media. Studley Park, is it possible that the needs of both local and international demand could be met? And if there is there a ramping up of production, can that be done?
The answer to that is, can it be done? I hope it can be done. The answer must be yes. If you get enough production going, but there is a huge domestic demand. The truth is, and the facts are, the domestic demand was not able to be satisfied, so therefore there was no export. Can it be done? If you get enough equipment on, if you do enough blasting, if you get competent people. I mean, another thing that has slipped everyone is the first person that the THA, this version of the THA, put in place to run Studley Park was a former member of Parliament, Ashworth Jack, who does not have the type of experience, is not a geologist or anyone. So the answer, Jensen, is yes, it can, and that is the best case scenario, and I hope that Studley Park gets to that position.
I don't know if anybody have any other questions on Studley Park. There's another issue that came up today, and that's Nutrien supposedly pulling out for at least for the rest of this year from doing business in Trinidad and Tobago. Can you speak to that and what the impact of that could be?
This is very concerning news. So I saw it a short while ago that Nutrien, not in Trinidad, but Nutrien, which is a global commodity company that produces fertilizer for the world and is one of the largest urea, nitrogen producers, ammonia producers in the world, that we are fortunate to have here in Trinidad, have issued from their head office in Saskatchewan, I believe, saying that they're not predicting any further input or production from Trinidad for the rest of the year. People of Trinidad and Tobago, this is part of the collapse I was talking about, and it is not fear-mongering and it is not alarmist. You know what that means for you and me? No revenue. Because we derive huge amounts of US foreign exchange, as well as revenue, as well as jobs from the Nutrien plant, which is the largest set of plants in Trinidad, is the Nutrien set. Now, other producers will now get the gas, I assume, that was going to be directed to Nutrien. But that does not augur well for us, because it's all about relationships. I remember one of the first crises we had to deal with was with Methanex back in 2016, when they sent to run the Trinidad operations a person whose global claim to fame was he worked for Methanex. He was sent to Chile to pack up the plants from Chile and take them out of Chile. And he was now being sent to Trinidad. And the fear that we had, they were coming to do the same thing in Trinidad. We had to go meet with all of the people, convince them not to do it. If a company like Nutrien is taking that position, it is a huge red flag. It is going to affect us. We're going to have less foreign exchange. We're going to have less revenue. All that Senator Dhanpaul spoke about is going to affect us even more, because it means the revenue you're hoping to get from the salaries already being paid late and not on time. It requires intervention, discussions, not threatening and extorting, not a fight about port fees. The port was built as subsidiary infrastructure to assist the plants. One of the advantages Trinidad has with these plants in Point Lisas is that you can manufacture the product and then take it right there very short, as opposed to in trains and all over the country that has to take place in the United States, for example. The port is not meant to be the main earner of revenue. It is the plant. So now those workers who are hoping to be back on plant, all of the secondary workers who are providing assistance, etc., what is going to happen to them between now and Christmas? And the worst thing that can happen to Trinidad is that those plants stay shut. And once you shut down a plant, it is not easy to restart from an engineering point of view. It costs a lot of money. That is now going to affect their spending money for turnarounds in the future and keeping us here. And don't fall into what's the word that Rhea used just now? The imagery of a minister of energy stand up and say, well, this plant was closed, that plant was closed over there. The reason some of those plants were closed, and you can check it for yourself, is they are over 30 and 40 years old. They had become inefficient. They had become old. You couldn't spend the money to get them up to current products. Nutrien has spent hundreds of millions of US dollars to make sure their plants are efficient and state of the art. And if those shut down permanently now, we're in some serious trouble. Even to have a plant shut down for a week, it is hundreds of millions of dollars lost. And for them to take that decision in their boardroom away, it is not auguring well for Trinidad. And that has knock-on effects, because the other competitors are now going to be looking and saying, well, boy, if they have shut down, what's going to happen to me next? And what is going to happen with the efficiency and the gas and these types of things? So it's not good.
Now, you mentioned the port fees, and that was one of the issues that was raised, that the port fees was a bit too low, and they were trying to increase that. The argument is that the previous government was allowing these companies to more or less take advantage.
I'm glad you gave me the opportunity, because it's something I've wanted to deal with. Completely untrue. So what you have them trying to do is retroactively go back and extract fees. So that's like you and me, you come into work in the taxi been charging you $10 all along, and one morning they wake up and say, well, you know what, for the last month, I think it should have been $20. So give me the extra 10 for every day you keep. It just doesn't work. That's not the commercial world. And also, as I said, the port fees are not meant to be where you make these huge sums of money. We are so marginal, as you call it in the business, in Trinidad and Tobago, for these companies, because the cost of gas has gone up. The amount of gas being provided has dropped. So they're operating at a really tight margin. The government came and unilaterally increased electricity rates for them, because it's industrial and commercial. So that cost goes up. You now want to come and increase port fees and do it retroactively. You are literally running the business out of Trinidad. And there are many places in the world with a lot more gas than we have who are willing and begging plants like that to come to them. So you are literally handing it, taking it from Trinidad and Tobago, handing it to a competitor. This is not a competition in Trinidad and Tobago, it's a global competition where the margins are very, very thin. And you make it increasingly uncompetitive, and add to that the attitude of the government's representatives towards these people who are sitting in boardrooms away, some who may not even be able to identify on a map where Trinidad and Tobago is. It takes nothing from them to take a commercial decision. Say, look, forget Trinidad and Tobago. Bring the plant elsewhere where we will make money.
No, there seemed to have been a good relationship between Nutrien and the previous administration. I asked that to ask this. Is the opposition, yourself specifically, willing to lend assistance by speaking with the officials in Nutrien to, as you say,
Jensen.
save them from pulling out.
Jensen, the opposition, the PNM, will always do whatever can be done to better Trinidad and Tobago. I personally always do those types of things, and don't assume for a moment that conversations don't take place. But at the end of the day, you don't deal with an opposition. I can't determine what is going to happen, what is going to happen with fees. You would have seen 10 years of negotiation by the PNM that benefited Trinidad and Tobago. 10 years of difficult negotiations in the energy sector, the restructuring of Atlantic LNG, which has never happened anywhere in the world, with us sitting down opposite a BP and a Shell and making sure that they stay around for decades and getting higher prices for Trinidad without them packing up and leaving. What you're seeing is incompetence and, really, to be honest, a gangster type behavior by certain individuals at NGC. All right?
I do not get from the government that all this revenue is being lost, because they are still making promises, you know, to do things that require more money. So I don't, there's a disconnect, is it? Or is it that y'all are not aware of some of these new sources of revenue, maybe the trade that we're going to get with all these other countries outside of CARICOM, maybe,
Really?
you know.
Well, Rhea, you stand by for the gimmickry and for the revelry and for the promises to become a reality. At the end of the day, we would, on the opposition side, would be thrilled if Trinidad and Tobago manages to find new sources of revenue. We have not heard of a single such new source. In fact, what we're seeing is the current and existing sources of revenue are drying up. Another thing that had me concerned on the way to work this morning, someone sent me, I think is advertising in newspapers today, an ad by Heritage for almost every single executive officer that could exist at Heritage being advertised as a vacant position. The same I expect to happen at Paria, the same I expect to happen at NGC, at PPGPL, at NE, and where we earn revenue from. As a citizen of Trinidad and Tobago, that frightens me, because after the behavior of this government, to the governor of the central bank, the CEO of FCB, the CEO of WASA, the CEO of TNTech, the CEO of TSTT, Republic Bank, what is going on now, all of these entities, who in their right mind, with competence, skill, and experience, would want to put themselves in that position? So I would be happy if they have new sources of revenue. We have not heard of a single one, and I certainly can't speculate where it's coming from. What I am seeing is literally a collapse taking place of our main revenue source. And then you mentioned the CARICOM, that too has us concerned, because our biggest trading partner for our food and beverage manufacturers, etc., is CARICOM. And when you take the type of attitude, and it is easy to talk, it is easy to say, well, I will find new partners. You don't think that's what we were trying as well? Partial trade agreements with Chile, all over the place. You're trying. Those things won't materialize overnight. So good luck. Hopefully we'll get paid our salaries on time this month. All right. Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
No, we have more questions.
Any other questions?
Yeah, question for
Jensen Lavan.
Yeah, a question for. Actually, I'll take Mr. Dhanpaul, because I know my colleagues have some questions for him as well, and then I'll go to Miss Melanie. Now, you spoke of a budget recalibration. Do you suspect that this will be done to facilitate the anticipated 10% by the end of the year?
Short answer, yes. And also, because of that, there may be instructions to, as has been done before, cut expenditure across the board.
Now, you also mentioned that you saw a budget derail in the past. When that happened the last time, what was done to bring it back on track?
It didn't come back on track. You have to reduce the assumptions. You have to redo the assumptions, sorry. And as I said, notice went out to all ministries across the board, 10%. Correct.
Cutting expenses.
Cutting expenditure. Both.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Last thing. This derailment is, I don't think it's a government issue in terms of this present government, but because of lack of revenue and increased spending. So, had the PNM been in position now, what would have been done from your standpoint to?
Well, definitely the PNM would not be making irresponsible decisions and irresponsible assumptions and irresponsible promises.
Yes, good day, Joshua Simongo from Guardian Media Limited. I just have a separate question. What it is, can you confirm that during your 10 years finance minister, you would have signed off on payments related to Colin Imbert's matter with the Auditor General, legal fees?
No.
No.
Definitely.
But as finance
You
minister,
realize that I stayed 1 month.
what's it, man? Yeah, true. In your opinion, you were at least served as temporarily as finance minister. I don't know if you have any observations or comments. Do you believe that it was fiscally responsible for the former finance minister to pursue that legal matter given the economic circumstances of the country at that time?
I would say I would reserve judgment on that, because firstly, I wasn't around, and secondly, it should not have been that way in the first place. It was the way I saw it from outside, a communication issue that could be handled much better
Between both parties?
between both parties, easily. Once a minister of finance cannot communicate with the auditor general, our country is in big trouble.
Thank you. Just questions for Mr. Young. Okay,
Sure.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Young, you would have served as energy minister in the previous administration. Right now, there's an issue with a group of quarrying operators. What they are alleging is that for the past 25 years, no sand and gravel processing licenses were granted by the Energy Ministry. First of all, is that claim accurate?
I wouldn't have the details. I saw an article, I think that's what you're referring to, and this ask by them for the Minister of Energy to have a meeting. There is no doubt that the Minerals Division is a one with issues, and that licenses weren't being processed as quickly as they should be. We had produced a number of amendments which were then sent to the LRC committee to try and get them into Parliament to try and modernize the whole system. So, for example, there's an archaic provision in the law that if you put in an application is not processed within, if I remember correctly, either 30 or 90 days,
It's 90.
you have to restart the application. When I was told as I said, but that makes absolutely no sense. Suppose now you say, well, I need this document, I need that document, and it can't be produced in time. Why would you ask people to restart? So what we had done is, when it was, because there was a serious aggregate problem, and then of course what it does is it allows illegal quarrying to take place, which has a lot of criminal issues as well involved. So I used to try to work with the public servants at the ministry to issue licenses or temporary approvals that you could go ahead and get the work done. So it is definitely an area that needs addressing, no doubt about that.
And what the group is calling for is like a moratorium. Do you think that would make sense?
I don't think a moratorium could make sense, because how do you define with a moratorium the illegal quarrying versus the illegal quarrying, right? And what you need to do is, well, okay, persons who have put in place applications and fulfill some minimum threshold, then do as we were trying to do. Allow them the opportunity whilst you're processing it to get on with the business, etc. That immediately provides a way to get rid of the illegal quarry operators, saying, well, have, to be operating, you've provided some sort of cover, but it is an area that needs addressing. I accept that.
And another thing under the former energy portfolio is there was an American citizen who contacted me. Basically, he has this court matter with Shell, because he is claiming that there was this incident at Shell that caused them to get cancer. There was this high dosage of benzene that was leaked into the atmosphere, and he was part of a group of people that were exposed to this. But he has this concern. I know it's subject to court, so it's limited comment. But he has this concern that, these contaminants might be leaking out from Beachfield facility from an underground pipe. But of course, he's claiming that he's encountering certain blockages from getting this information out. But during your stint as energy minister, were there any concerns that you are aware of that there might have been infrastructure related to Beachfield facility that might be leaking out into the environment and that sort of thing?
Absolutely none. This is news to me, and I mean that is a private, that is shell with the government. Apart from a regulator and regulatory point of view, we have little to do with. But no, nothing ever came to me, certainly as the Minister of Energy or to the ministry, because they would have brought it to my attention about any dangerous contaminants leaking. I mean, especially at Beachfield, where we had spent significant sums of money at the time to prepare it for manatee and subject a whole set of noise about you're wasting money, which of course the population is going to benefit from. So the answer to that is no. And that is something that should be easily verifiable by just allowing the experts to take a look at it. The Ministry of Energy has a responsibility, if that sort of complaint is raised, to do an investigation, etc.
And just final question, I guess it will be a bit of a controversial one, but after you left as Prime Minister after the election, there were a group of your colleagues who made I don't know if you would agree, underhand remarks about how the whole process unfolded before the general election. One of them, in my opinion, at least from interpreting between the lines, was Foster Cummings. In the last few weeks, there have been a lot of stories coming out about companies associated to Mr. Cummings, but the political leader has stood behind him. Is it that you as a senior member of the party, or certainly as a former senior member of the party, do you stand by the political leader's position on this matter, given how the government would have expressed certain concerns about the UNC, former people associated with the UNC who would have been, linked to certain other activities, alleged activities? Do you and Mr. Dhanpaul as well stand behind the political leader's stance behind Mr. Cummings, his role as General Secretary?
First of all, I don't drag in Senator Dhanpaul.
He's a former cabinet colleague.
Yeah, well, he's new to all this, and of course, as he said, he was there for a short period of time. At the end of the day, the political leader has made her position very clear. We stand behind the decisions of our political leader, and I think, at the end of the day, I didn't quite understand the last part you said about UNC and... No,
sorry, just to clarify, when you were in government, you would have pointed at alleged instances of corruption by former administration.
What you would have seen as a big differentiating factor is the PNM. When the PNM, we didn't just throw things out loosely. If we believed and we had evidence that there was corruption, it was passed over to the authorities. Where we would ensure that civil action was brought on behalf of the people of Trinidad and Tobago, for example, the EMBD matter, the Eden Gardens matter. So a huge difference between ourselves and the UNC is that we don't make loose allegations. What they are doing in relation to Senator Cummings is just throwing mud and hoping something will stick. And as the political leader has made her position very clear, which is my personal position, not in relation to Senator Cummings, but in relation to any citizen or anybody operating in Trinidad and Tobago. If there is evidence of wrongdoing, take it to the authorities who are in charge of investigating and prosecuting, and let them do what is necessary. But we stand behind the political leader. The political leader is the one who will choose the 6 senators and make these decisions. And that's the position. All right. Thank you all very much.
All right, so we're going to take one last question. I know there was a question for Senator Roberts-Radgman, and we'll have Jensen ask that question, and then we'll wrap.
And then, well, it's a 2-part question, right?
And you will be famous for 2 parts.
I go ask one part, and my colleague will ask the second part. You mentioned that the current government seemingly is holding Tobagonians in contempt, but the largest budget allocation that the THA has received came from the government. How do you reconcile those two things?
So there are several things, and to not misquote me, Jensen, I didn't use the word contempt.
Well, you didn't use it in that context, but you did use it later.
All right, that's fine. All right, so let me say this. the first thing is this. In the Senate, I would have dissected in detail Tobago's allocation. So we would have taken a very close look at what the recurrent allocation has been earmarked for. And I would have also demonstrated through various line items that Tobago's development allocation actually decreased. This is the lowest allocation that the TPP-led assembly has actually received since it's been in office. So in terms of that whole question about, remember when I mentioned the flowery language? This is what we have happening here again, the smoke and mirrors, where on the face of it, it looks like, oh yes, this benefits the people of Tobago. But when you really look at the allocation itself, you realize that we have gotten a decreased allocation for development. So what has happened is that our ability to really manage our development agenda has been eroded considerably by virtue of this new budget. You also, what was the second part of your question?
Then he didn't.
And then you're gonna ask.
The chief secretary suggested that, given the reports of possible war in the region, that Tobago is a place that people should go and relax, and Tobago appears to be safe from any sort of, threat. So what do you think about that? Is it that Tobagonians are feeling that they are scotch-free and there's no need for worry?
That is furthest from the truth. Tobagonians are very concerned. We are actually quite scared. We are not war-type people. We are relaxed, loving type of people. Or fishermen, for instance, are a very vital and core part of our communities. A lot of our communities revolve around fishing. The fishermen are concerned. They have been asking questions. We are yet to hear from the Prime Minister. We haven't heard anything concrete from the Chief Secretary. Tobagonians are worried. They are very, very concerned. When everything unfolded on Friday, I cannot tell you the amount of calls. I was actually in Trinidad when everything unfolded, and the amount of calls I got from people in Tobago, from my family, from colleagues saying, where are you? What is happening? Do you have any kind of information as someone who is in Parliament? Do you know what is happening on our islands? And then, of course, let's be reasonable. Let's look at the proximity between Trinidad and Tobago. Do we really think that if anything was supposed to happen in the region, that Tobago will be spared, that we'd remain unaffected? Further from the truth.
Thank you very much, our viewing and listening audience. Thank you very much to the members of the media that came in person to discuss with our colleagues issues affecting us as Trinidad and Tobago. We want to thank Senators Dhanpaul and Roberts-Radgman, as well as MP Stuart Young, SC. We thank you so much for viewing and listening from the Office of the Opposition Leader of Trinidad and Tobago.